and welcome to another episode of Cherie, an alternative and avant-garde TV show that devoted to art, beauty, photography, and music, and much, much more. In general, devoted to life and the lifestyle. My name is Cherie Laurent, and I am going to be your host for tonight's episode. So please sit, relax, and let's enjoy our journey. We will start this episode with my music video, Down on Me, and that's because a lot of you requested it, and I hope you will enjoy the song for the people who hasn't seen it, and thank you for all the feedback about the song. So I hope you love it.
At the heart of the process of globalization is the rise of a new organizational paradigm in the form of the market system. A new logic of commercial exchange has expanded to ever more spheres of human activity. After millennia of societies and economies being governed primarily by people making choices within a political context, today, economies around the world are less governed by the choices of their political institutions and more by the rules of economics, markets, and flows of financial capital. This truly radical transfer of power and decision-making has taken place within a few short decades, with far-reaching implications. More and more societies around the world, and more aspects of those societies, become opened up to being organized through the logic of the market system. Centuries old, established local ways of doing things are becoming increasingly organized via global networks of economic exchange. Since the origins of society, people have formed political institutions to make collective decisions for their community. Tribes, chieftains, states, and empires have been governed predominantly by a small elite group of people making collective decisions about the ordering of their societies and economies. The modern era saw the expansion of another major modality for the coordination and management of resources within society, the market system. Markets have always been there, but have traditionally operated within the confines and constraints of the cultural, social, and political institutions of their society. Typically, in pre-modern societies, most of the resources produced are for direct family consumption. Excess resources are typically aggregated and controlled by the ruling political authorities. Within these societies, markets play a relatively limited role in terms of decision-making. One of the primary characteristics of the modern era has been the rise of capitalism and the market system, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. With urbanization, mass production, and the specialization of labor, the mass of people became dependent on the capitalist market system for their everyday livelihood. In a modern society, the market system comes to take on a new role. Instead of being a means to an end that is controlled by the political, social, and cultural elite, it becomes an end in itself and increasingly liberated from the socio-political constraints as an ever more important means for decision-making. The economy becomes the glue that binds people together through their interdependence on each other. Through the process of industrialization, it becomes a major independent organizational structure. During this process of industrialization, it became accepted that the market system needs independence from socio-culture and political control. Although this idea was challenged during the 20th century by centrally planned economies like the USSR, it eventually came to dominate. Until the middle half of the 20th century, hierarchies were almost unanimously seen as the only effective method for organizing production within large mass societies. It was at this time that a new ideology of the free market as a distributed coordination mechanism in its own right arose. One can see the early conceptual stages of this process with the work of Friedrich Hayek. Hayek recognized that prices produced by supply and demand alone could be an accurate and sufficient signal of information to allow decentralized coordination to achieve the optimal allocation of resources within society. The latter half of the 20th century saw the realization of Hayek's ideas and in other developed economies. With the acceleration of a process of transferring socio-economic organization from hierarchical social organization to market structures, as promoted by a new ideology of neoliberalism in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, public provision started to retreat, and private production via the market started to expand into almost all areas. The neoliberal paradigm is the logic of the market system. Originally, it may have been an economic theory. Neoliberalism came to be much more than this, as it came to encompass a set of ideas or paradigm about human nature, economic, and social organization. Neoliberalism is the free market ideology based on individual liberty and limited government that connected human freedom to the actions of the rational self. Neoliberalism formed the conceptual rationale for shifting economic organization from people and hierarchies toward an impersonal logic of the market. In order for it to achieve this, it had to remove power and capabilities from the nation-state. A battle was fought during the latter half of the 20th century for control over the state, and it was largely won by the proponents of this new market-based model. Neoliberalism has a clear agenda to shift power from democratic systems of governance and move it to the market. This was done through two primary vehicles. One was privatization and deregulation of national economies. The other method was the shifting of power out of national democracies and their parliaments and into the executive and international bodies that were not controlled via democratic procedures such as the IMF or WTO. As people became increasingly aware that the political power to affect the things that mattered in their lives was fast slipping out of their hands, civil society started to react, clashing with the architects of this new global economy, the epicenter of which was here in Seattle on November 30th, 1999, where massive street protests turned mounting tensions into violent outbursts. However, the battle was already over. The days of the national democratic system exercising independent power were coming to a close. The ideological and regulatory playing field was now set for an unprecedented expansion in global economic activity. An era starting with the fall of the Berlin Wall that is now called hyperglobalization. Countries around the world began in earnest to industrialize their economies, bringing in-country workers into urban centers to work in the low-skilled manufacturing of goods that could now be exported to global supply chains. Global trade agreements removed the limitations of the national economy as the world economy could absorb a much greater amount of production. This process of industrialization in China and other emerging markets drove huge growth in the global economy over this time. The expansion of telecommunication networks and the introduction of computerized coordination into the corporation enabled it to geographically disaggregate certain aspects of production. Outsourcing expanded, creating greater exchange along the emerging global supply chains. More products and information were starting to move between more nodes, faster, and at greater volume. The deregulation of financial institutions in the late 1980s enabled the formation of a global financial architecture to move investment around the world. Foreign direct investment started to flow to emerging economies as money became relatively freely available within capital markets. This was the pinnacle of neoliberal economic globalization that took place during the 1990s and early 2000s with the development of global supply chains and hyper-growth in China. Driving the commodity supercycle, this period of globalization drove dramatic changes around the world. In places like Dubai, Shenzhen, or here in Shanghai, as a city grew at 10% a year for 20 years, with its iconic skyscrapers appearing almost overnight, Shanghai will forever personify this period of globalization as the balance of power in the global economy changed substantially. This era marked the culmination of a centuries-long process in the shift of power and decision-making from political organizations to the markets and private enterprise. This period of extraordinary growth in the global economy all started unraveling over the course of a few months with the emergence of a global financial crisis. The well-accepted truths of economic development were shattered overnight. Everything became open to re-questioning, and an era of uncertainty began. The cold, hard realities of national divides and geopolitics came to once again prevail. An era in the history of globalization was over, and a period of searching began when a new model for globalization was to emerge. Almost a decade later, it would take a very different form. The net result of this period of hyperglobalization is an economy that has evolved into a global form that is too complex for any nation, state, or centralized organization to manage. In the space of just 2 decades, something profound had happened. Some kind of global system had emerged that was greater than any of its parts. After thousands of years of people being guided by a ruling elite, according to a municipality of local cultures and their different value systems, humanity is now embarked on an extraordinary process: the formation of a single global value system. A single logic for value exchange that is extending even farther and even deeper to replace the age-old structures that have organized societies for centuries.
cover of every magazine, driven around in a white limousine. I'm just a size queen. Size queen, is that so obscene? I know you want me, I know you are keen. So be gentle, baby, don't be mean. I'm just a size queen. I want to see myself on a big bright screen, whining and dining fine cuisine. I wanna be the it girl on the scene. Size queen. I wanna be remembered as a beauty queen. I wanna be an icon of style and glamour and sheen. Or maybe I could invent a sex machine. So, show me the money and call me honey bunny. I'm a sex symbol. What's so funny? I'm just a size queen. You know what I mean. I know you want me. I know you are keen. So be gentle, baby. Don't be mean. I'm just a size queen. Size queen, is that so obscene? I know you want me. I know you are keen. So be gentle, baby. Don't be mean. I'm just a size queen.
The form of hyperglobalization that expanded around the turn of the millennium was based on neoliberal economic theory. It was marked by a reduction in trade barriers, the development of outsourcing and global supply chains, the privatization of state assets, and the shift of power from national legislation to multinational institutions. The massive expansion of the global financial market and the formation of the global cities network. But the financial crisis was to bring this massive expansion and economic exchange to a shattering end. Global flow of goods, finance, and services flattened. The well-accepted truths of the free market became reopened for questioning as multinational organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have come to have less influence. Through the financial crisis, the political establishment in developed economies became increasingly delegitimatized as nationalism began to once again expand. While many speculated about the end of globalization underneath the ashes, the seeds for the next era of globalization had already been sown as a revolution in information technology was continuing unabated. The model for globalization was transforming. The globalization of today is no longer driven by increasing exchange of goods, but instead information and services. While political organizations remain divided, soaring flows of cross-border data are taking global integration to new levels as we approach 4 billion connected to the internet. These huge flows of data and the platforms that orchestrate them have become the new architecture to globalization. The story of globalization, as it has unfolded over the past decades, has been one of a new set of information technologies, enabling the development of a global economic and financial system that brings humanity into a commonly shared value system mediated by markets. In the past, the linkage between the underlying information technology and the institutional structures that resided on them was not apparent. Globalization was seen to be driven by the institutional structure of the multinational corporation of trade-free agreements. Would you like to be touched by an angel? Then subscribe to onlyfans.com/Cherie777, where you'll enjoy the most exquisite art, music, photos, videos, where fantasies, dreams, illusions, and mirage are all merged together. Subscribe now and enjoy the world beyond your imagination.
That was all for tonight. We have a very long conversation, but we have to stop because we only have 26 minutes. We will come back next week. Until next week, take care of yourself, the people you love, and the people around you. As I always say, more love, more kindness, more understanding, more respect. It will make the place, the world, everywhere is a better place for you, for me, for everybody to live. So if you like to support me, you've got Cherie on OnlyFans, Cherie777, my website, mycherietv.com. My music is on Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, everywhere. And I have Instagram and Facebook. Also Roku and Amazon and Get Happy TV in America. I love you and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Have a good night. Bye.